In the halls of justice, she commanded respect with every word. But in the aisles of commerce, she discovered that a black robe holds more power than black skin ever could. The Honorable Victoria Sterling adjusted the rearview mirror of her Honda Accord and took a deep breath. After 12 hours of back-to-back federal court proceedings, she had exactly 1 hour before her twins' soccer practice to accomplish what should have been a simple task: buying school clothes for Marcus and Maya's upcoming sophomore year. At 42, Judge Sterling had learned to maximize every minute of her carefully orchestrated life as both a single mother and one of the youngest federal judges in the Northern District. She pulled into the parking lot of Meridian Department Store, an upscale retailer known for quality clothing and, unfortunately, prices that reflected its prestigious reputation. Victoria had been putting off this shopping trip for weeks, but with school starting Monday and both kids having grown significantly over the summer, there was no more time for delays. As she walked through the gleaming entrance, Victoria felt the familiar weight of transition. In her courthouse chambers, draped in judicial robes, she was Your Honor, a figure of ultimate authority whose every word carried the force of federal law. Here, in civilian clothes consisting of dark jeans, a simple blouse and comfortable flats, she was just another customer, or so she hoped. The store's layout was familiar. Juniors' clothing on the second floor, men's department to the left, and the customer service desk, prominently positioned near the entrance, where 2 employees chatted quietly while eyeing incoming shoppers. Victoria headed toward the escalator, her mental shopping list already prioritized. Marcus needed dress shirts for debate team, Maya wanted jeans that weren't totally embarrassing, and both needed shoes that would survive the rigors of teenage life. The second floor buzzed with the energy of back-to-school season. Parents shepherded reluctant teenagers between racks, while sales associates restocked merchandise with practiced efficiency. Victoria approached a display of polo shirts, checking the sizes and mentally calculating whether the $40 price tag was reasonable for something Marcus might outgrow within months. "Can I help you find something?" The voice belonged to a young sales associate named Ashley, whose smile seemed genuine as she approached. "Thank you," Victoria replied. "I'm looking for some shirts for my son. He's about this tall," she gestured, "and usually wears a medium." Ashley nodded and began pulling options from nearby racks. "These are popular with the high school kids," she said, showing Victoria several styles. "Are you looking for something specific?" As they discussed options, Victoria became aware of movement in her peripheral vision. A security guard, a middle-aged white man with the bearing of former law enforcement, had positioned himself near the jewelry counter with a clear line of sight to her location. When she looked directly at him, he made a show of checking his radio, but his attention remained focused on her. Victoria felt the familiar knot form in her stomach, the same sensation she had experienced countless times throughout her life, from her days as a law student at Harvard to her early years as a prosecutor. The feeling of being watched, evaluated, and found wanting based solely on the color of her skin. She continued her conversation with Ashley, but her awareness heightened as the security guard's presence became more obvious. When she moved to examine jeans in Maya's size, he followed at a discreet distance. When she checked the prices on sneakers, he appeared at a nearby display, ostensibly organizing merchandise while keeping her in sight. "Mom's shopping alone today?" The voice startled her. The security guard had approached directly, his tone carrying an undertone of suspicion that made Victoria's legal instincts flare. "I'm sorry," she replied, maintaining the professional composure that had served her well on the bench. "Just noticed you've been looking at a lot of expensive items," he continued, his name tag identifying him as Robert Torres. "Making sure you're finding everything okay." The implication was clear, and Victoria felt the familiar surge of anger mixed with profound disappointment. Here, in 2025, she was still being followed around a store like a potential criminal. She thought about the irony. Just hours earlier, she had been presiding over a civil rights case, and now she was living one. "I'm shopping for my children," she said evenly. "Is there a problem?" Torres' demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more aggressive. "Mom, I'm going to need to see some ID and a credit card if you're planning to make any purchases." The request was so absurd, so clearly discriminatory, that Victoria momentarily wondered if she was experiencing some sort of stress-induced hallucination. In her 15 years of retail shopping, no one had ever demanded to see her credit card before allowing her to make a purchase. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice carrying the subtle authority that made attorneys think twice before interrupting her in court. "Store policy," Torres replied, though his shifty eyes suggested otherwise. "For expensive purchases, we need to verify ability to pay." "What constitutes an expensive purchase?" Victoria asked, her prosecutor training taking over. "Anything over $50, he said, a number that clearly encompassed nearly everything in the store. By now their exchange had attracted attention. Other shoppers were slowing their browsing to observe the confrontation, some pulling out phones with the instinctive understanding that they might be witnessing something significant. Ashley, the sales associate who had been helping Victoria, looked mortified and kept glancing between her customer and the security guard. "Mr. Torres," Victoria said, reading his name tag again for emphasis, "I'd like to speak with your manager." "I am the manager," he lied, a fact Victoria could discern both from his defensive posture and Ashley's shocked expression. "Then, I'd like to speak with the store manager," Victoria clarified. Torres hesitated, clearly not expecting this level of pushback. Most customers, when confronted with discriminatory treatment, either left in embarrassment or engaged in emotional arguments that could be dismissed as disruptive behavior. Victoria's calm insistence on proper protocol was clearly not in his playbook. "She's busy," he said finally. "Then I'll wait," Victoria replied, crossing her arms and positioning herself where she wouldn't be blocking other customers, but also wouldn't be easily dismissed. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but at that moment, a young man in his 20s approached the group. His name tag identified him as Derek, assistant manager, and his expression suggested he understood that the situation had escalated beyond routine security theater. "Is there a problem here?" Derek asked, looking between Victoria and Torres. "This gentleman," Victoria said, emphasizing the word with subtle irony, "has informed me that I need to show identification and a credit card before I'm allowed to purchase anything over $50. I'm curious about when this policy was implemented and whether it's applied consistently to all customers." Derek's face went pale as he realized the legal implications of what Victoria was describing. "Ma'am, that's not our policy." "Sir?" He turned to Torres. "What's going on here?" Torres, realizing that his authority was being undermined, doubled down. "She's been acting suspicious, looking at expensive items, asking detailed questions about prices. I was following security protocols." "What exactly about my behavior was suspicious?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying the prosecutorial edge that had intimidated countless defendants. "Was it that I asked about sizes for my children? That I compared prices? That I spoke politely to your sales associate? Please be specific." The crowd of onlookers had grown and several people were now openly recording the confrontation. Victoria was aware of the cameras but felt no embarrassment. If anything, she welcomed the documentation. Derek looked around at the gathering crowd and made a decision. "Ma'am, I apologize for this misunderstanding. There's been an error. Please, let me personally help you find what you need." But Torres wasn't finished. "Derek, I know what I saw. She doesn't look like she belongs in this section of the store. I'm just doing my job." The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. In that moment, Torres had verbalized what everyone already understood. Victoria was being profiled not because of her behavior, but because of her race. "And what exactly do I look like I belong in?" Victoria asked quietly. Torres realized his mistake immediately, but the damage was done. "I didn't mean... That's not what I..." "It's exactly what you meant," Victoria said. "You looked at a black woman examining merchandise and assumed she was a threat. You demanded identification not based on any suspicious behavior, but based on your preconceptions about who deserves to shop here." Derek stepped forward. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. This is completely unacceptable. Torres, you need to..." "Actually," Victoria interrupted, "before anyone goes anywhere, I think there are some things you should know." She reached into her purse and pulled out her federal judicial identification. "My name is Judge Victoria Sterling. I serve on the United States District Court for the Northern District." The silence that followed was complete. Even the background noise of the store seemed to fade as the weight of her revelation settled over the group. "I spend my days presiding over cases involving civil rights violations, discrimination, and constitutional protections," Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly to everyone within hearing distance. "I've sentenced people to prison for hate crimes, ruled on employment discrimination cases, and upheld the very laws that make what just happened here illegal." Torres looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Derek appeared to be mentally calculating the store's potential liability, but Victoria wasn't finished. "Mr. Torres, do you understand what you've just done? You've engaged in textbook consumer racial profiling in front of multiple witnesses and cameras. You've created a hostile environment based solely on race. You've violated both state and federal anti-discrimination laws." She paused, looking around at the crowd of onlookers, many of whom were now recording her words. "But here's what troubles me most," she continued. "This isn't about me. I have the education, resources, and legal knowledge to address this situation. What about the countless other black customers who experience this same treatment but don't have the tools to fight back? What about the teenagers who internalize these messages about their worth? What about the families who simply stop shopping here rather than endure this humiliation?" Derek stepped forward, his voice shaky. "Your Honor, we had no idea. This is not representative of our company values. I assure you that we will investigate this thoroughly." "Will you?" Victoria asked. "Because according to research I'm familiar with, 80% of middle-class black shoppers report experiencing racial stigma while shopping. 59% report being perceived as potential shoplifters. This isn't an isolated incident, Mr. Martinez, Derek Martinez. Mr. Martinez, this is a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. The question is whether your company is interested in being part of the solution or continuing to be part of the problem." Torres, who had been silent during Victoria's speech, finally found his voice. "Judge, Your Honor, I made a mistake. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I'm sorry." Victoria looked at him steadily. "Mr. Torres, I appreciate your apology, but apologies don't change systems. What's your plan to ensure this doesn't happen to the next black customer who walks through these doors?" The question hung in the air as Derek scrambled to find an adequate response. Finally, he said, "Your Honor, would you be willing to help us develop better training programs, anti-bias education for our staff?" Victoria considered the request. In her courtroom, she was accustomed to handing down sentences that addressed wrongdoing after the fact. But here was an opportunity to prevent future harm, to transform a moment of discrimination into lasting change. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But I want more than training programs. I want comprehensive policy changes. I want data collection on security stops to identify patterns. I want accountability measures that have real consequences. And I want it all implemented not just here, but chain-wide." Derek nodded eagerly. "Yes, Your Honor, whatever you think is necessary." A voice from the crowd called out, "You tell them, Judge." Others began to clap, and soon the applause filled the store section. Victoria held up a hand. "The applause is appreciated, but let's remember what this is really about. This is about dignity. This is about the fundamental right of every American to enter a public accommodation without being presumed guilty of something they haven't done." She looked around at the faces, some supportive, others uncomfortable, all listening. "I became a judge because I believe in justice. Not just the kind that happens in courtrooms, but the kind that should happen in every interaction between human beings. When we profile people based on race, we're not just violating laws. We're undermining the very principles that make our society worth defending." An elderly black woman in the crowd stepped forward. "Judge, I've been shopping while black for 70 years. Thank you for saying what needed to be said." A young white mother with 2 small children approached hesitantly. "Your Honor, I never realized this was happening. What can people like me do to help?" Victoria smiled at her. "You can start by believing it when people tell you about their experiences. You can speak up when you witness discrimination, and you can raise your children to see beyond stereotypes." As the crowd began to disperse, Ashley, the sales associate who had originally helped Victoria, approached nervously. "Judge Sterling, I just want to say, I see this kind of thing happen and I never know what to do. I'm sorry I didn't speak up." "Ashley," Victoria said gently, "you were professional and helpful from the moment I arrived, but you're right that there's more you could have done. When you see discrimination happening, your silence becomes complicity. Next time, I hope you'll find your voice." Ashley nodded, tears in her eyes. "I will. I promise." Derek cleared his throat. "Your Honor, about those policy changes, could we schedule a meeting to discuss specifics?" "We can," Victoria agreed, "but I want you to understand something. This isn't about punishment, it's about progress. Your company has an opportunity to become a leader in retail equality. The question is whether you'll seize that opportunity or let it pass by." As Victoria finally completed her shopping, with assistance from Derek himself, she reflected on the afternoon's events. She had come to buy clothes for her children, and instead found herself fighting the same battles she thought her generation had already won. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom, where are you? Practice starts in 20 minutes. She smiled, remembering why she was there in the first place. Her children, brilliant, funny, ambitious teenagers who deserved to grow up in a world where their character mattered more than their color. As she walked toward the exit, carrying bags containing the school clothes that had started this entire episode, Victoria heard Torres call her name. "Judge Sterling," he said, approaching with obvious reluctance. "I wanted to thank you." She stopped, surprised. "Thank me for not just destroying me," he said. "You could have. You had every right to. But you turned it into something educational. I have grandchildren who are mixed race. I never thought about what they might face. Today opened my eyes." Victoria studied his face, seeing genuine remorse alongside the embarrassment. "Mr. Torres, the fact that you have mixed-race grandchildren and still engaged in racial profiling tells me how deeply these biases can run, but it also gives me hope. If you can change, anyone can." "What do I do now?" he asked. "You start by admitting that this wasn't an isolated mistake. It was part of a pattern of assumptions you've been making about black customers. Then you commit to doing the work to change, and you use your experience to help train others." Torres nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." As Victoria drove to the soccer field, she thought about the ripple effects of the afternoon's events. The videos would be shared on social media, sparking conversations in living rooms across the country. Derek would follow through on implementing new policies. She would make sure of that. Torres would hopefully become an advocate for change, rather than an agent of discrimination. But most importantly, her twins would come home to a mother who had stood up not just for herself, but for every black person who had ever been made to feel unwelcome in a space they had every right to occupy. At the soccer field, Victoria found Marcus and Maya warming up with their team. Maya jogged over when she spotted her mother. "Mom, you look different," she said, studying Victoria's face. "What happened?" "I'll tell you about it on the way home," Victoria replied. "But I want you to remember something. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in courtrooms. They're fought in everyday spaces by ordinary people who refuse to accept extraordinary treatment." Marcus joined them, slightly out of breath from running drills. "Mom, you're being all philosophical again. Did something happen?" Victoria looked at her children, her brilliant, beautiful, strong children who would inherit whatever world her generation left behind. "Something happened," she agreed. "But something better happened too. And that's the story I want to tell you." 3 months later, Meridian Department Store announced the implementation of the Sterling Protocol, a comprehensive anti-discrimination program developed in partnership with Judge Victoria Sterling. The program included mandatory bias training for all employees, regular audits of security practices, and a customer advocacy position to address discrimination complaints. The protocol was later adopted by major retailers across the country, becoming a model for how businesses could proactively address consumer racial profiling. And in her judicial chambers, Judge Victoria Sterling kept a small receipt from that day's shopping trip, not as a reminder of the discrimination she faced, but as proof that one person's courage to speak truth to power could create change that extended far beyond the walls of a single store. When injustice targets us personally, how do we choose between seeking individual vindication and creating systemic change? And in a world where dignity should be freely given, what does it mean to have to fight for respect that should be automatic?